At my son's funeral, his wife's lover leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, old man, I'll spend his millions better than he did." Suddenly, my son chuckled in the coffin. "Because that man is, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought I would outlive my son. At 62, I had always imagined Milton would be the one standing over my grave, not the other way around. But there I was, March 18th, 2024, staring at a mahogany casket that supposedly contained my 37-year-old boy. The Morrison funeral home smelled like lilies and grief. The air was thick with whispered condolences and the rustle of black fabric. I stood in the front row, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Milton's wife, Mallory, sat beside me, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that seemed more for show than actual tears. 3 days earlier, I had received the call that shattered my world. Milton had suffered a massive heart attack at his office. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. 37 years old, healthy as a horse, dead from cardiac arrest. The doctor said it happened sometimes, especially with the stress of running a $12 million business empire. I should have been devastated, I should have been broken, but standing there, listening to the pastor drone on about eternal rest and heavenly peace, something felt wrong. Not just the obvious wrongness of burying your child, but something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The guest list was extensive. Milton had been well loved in the business community, respected by colleagues, cherished by friends. At least, that's what I had always believed. But as I watched people file past the casket, offering their hollow words of comfort, I began to notice things. Mallory's grief seemed calculated. She cried at precisely the right moments, accepted condolences with the perfect amount of dignity, and somehow managed to look devastatingly beautiful in her black designer dress. For a woman who had just lost her husband of 9 years, she seemed remarkably composed. Then there was Derek Morrison, Milton's business partner and Mallory's supposed friend. He stood near the back of the room, his eyes not on the casket but on Mallory. Every time she moved, his gaze followed. When she spoke to other guests, he listened intently. When she touched her hair nervously, he leaned forward slightly, as if connected to her by some invisible string. I had met Derek dozens of times over the years. He was Milton's right hand at the company, the man who handled the financial side while my son focused on operations. A smooth talker with perfectly styled hair and expensive suits, Derek had always struck me as the type of man who measured everything by its potential value. The service dragged on. People shared memories of Milton that sounded rehearsed, sanitized versions of a life I knew had been much more complex. My son had been passionate, sometimes reckless, fiercely loyal to those he loved. But listening to these speeches, you would think he was some kind of saint who never raised his voice or made a questionable decision. When it came time for the family to say their final goodbyes, I found myself walking toward the casket with leaden feet. Milton looked peaceful, his hands folded over his chest, wearing the navy suit I had bought him for his wedding day. His face was pale but serene, younger somehow than his 37 years. I leaned down and whispered, "I'm going to miss you, son. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." As I stepped back, Mallory approached the casket. Her performance was flawless, the grieving widow saying goodbye to her beloved husband. She placed a single white rose on his chest and murmured something I couldn't hear. Then Derek appeared beside me. I hadn't noticed him approaching, but suddenly he was there, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. He leaned toward my ear, and what he said next changed everything. "Don't worry, old man," he whispered, his voice barely audible but dripping with satisfaction. "I'll spend his millions better than he ever did." The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to stare at Derek, but his expression was neutral, almost bored. Had I misheard? Had grief finally driven me to hallucinations? But then something impossible happened. From inside the casket came a sound that made my blood freeze. A soft chuckle, quiet, barely perceptible, but unmistakably Milton's laugh. I gripped the edge of the casket, my heart hammering against my ribs. Derek had heard it too. His face had gone pale, and he took a quick step backward. Around us, the funeral continued, no one else seeming to notice anything unusual. "Did you—" I started to ask Derek, but he was already walking away, moving quickly toward the exit. I stared down at Milton's still face, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. His chest didn't rise or fall. His eyelids didn't flutter. He looked exactly like what he was supposed to be, a dead man, but I knew what I had heard, that soft, knowing chuckle that meant Milton found something amusing. It was the same laugh he had used as a child when he knew a secret that adults hadn't figured out yet, the same laugh he had made when he beat me at chess for the first time. The same laugh that meant he was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The rest of the service passed in a blur. I went through the motions of accepting condolences, shaking hands, nodding at appropriate moments. But my mind was racing. Derek's whispered words kept echoing in my head. I'll spend his millions better than he ever did. What did that mean? And how could Milton have laughed when he was supposed to be dead? As the funeral home began to empty, I found myself alone with the casket for a moment. Mallory was outside, graciously accepting flowers and condolences from the last few guests. The funeral director was busy with arrangements for the burial the next day. I leaned close to the casket again, my voice barely a whisper. "Milton, son, if you can hear me?" Nothing. No response, no movement, no mysterious laughter. Just the profound silence of death. But as I straightened up, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Milton's wedding ring was missing. The simple gold band I had helped him choose 9 years ago, the one he never took off, was gone from his finger. I looked around frantically, wondering if it had been removed for some funeral preparation reason. But morticians typically left wedding rings on the deceased. It was considered part of their final dignity, their lasting connection to love. So where was Milton's ring? And why did its absence feel like another piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand? The drive home was torture. Every traffic light seemed to last forever. Every mile stretched into eternity. I kept replaying the events at the funeral home, trying to make sense of what I had experienced. Derek's cruel whisper, Milton's impossible laughter, the missing wedding ring. None of it made sense individually, but together, they painted a picture I wasn't ready to accept. My house felt enormous and empty when I walked through the door. I had lived there alone since my wife Sarah passed away 8 years ago, but it had never felt this hollow. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat in my recliner, staring at the framed photos on the side table. Milton at his high school graduation, beaming with pride. Milton and Mallory on their wedding day, looking like they had stepped out of a fairy tale. Milton last Christmas, laughing at some joke I couldn't remember now. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. It was Mallory, her voice soft and fragile. "Joel, I just wanted to thank you for today. Milton would have been so proud of how beautiful the service was." "Yes," I managed, my throat tight. "It was lovely. I know this is difficult, but we need to talk about arrangements. The lawyer wants to meet with us next week about the will and the business. Derek thinks we should—" "Derek thinks?" I interrupted, the whiskey making me bolder than usual. "Since when does Derek think for our family?" There was a pause. "He's been such a help, Joel. I don't know what I would do without him during this time." "I bet you don't," I thought, but I kept it to myself. "We'll talk later, Mallory. I need some time." After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, pieces of a terrible picture beginning to form in my mind. Derek's whispered threat, Mallory's convenient grief, Milton's missing wedding ring, and that impossible moment of laughter from a dead man. Something was very, very wrong, and I was going to find out what. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times as I finally headed to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that soft chuckle again, Milton's laugh full of secrets and hidden knowledge. "What did you know, son?" I thought, staring at the ceiling. "And how can I find out when you're supposed to be gone forever?" Outside my window, a car engine started and drove away into the night. But it wasn't until the next morning that I would realize someone had been watching my house, waiting to see what the old man might figure out next. I didn't sleep. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that soft chuckle echoing from the mahogany casket. By 5 in the morning, I gave up and made coffee, my hands shaking as I measured the grounds. The morning news droned in the background, but I wasn't really listening. My mind kept circling back to the same impossible questions. How does a dead man laugh? Why was Derek so confident about spending Milton's money? And where was my son's wedding ring? I needed answers, and I knew where to start. St. Mary's Hospital sat on the outskirts of town like a concrete fortress against human suffering. I had driven past it countless times over the years, but never imagined I would be walking through its doors seeking answers about my son's death. The information desk was staffed by a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who directed me to the cardiac unit. My shoes echoed against the polished floors as I made my way through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and barely suppressed despair. Dr. Patricia Wells was the attending physician who had pronounced Milton dead. She was younger than I expected, probably in her early 40s, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. When I introduced myself as Milton's father, her expression immediately softened with practiced sympathy. "Mr. Holloway, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your son was brought in too late for us to do anything. By all accounts, it was very sudden. I need to understand what happened, I said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair across from her desk. Milton was healthy. He exercised regularly, didn't smoke, barely drank. How does a 37-year-old man just drop dead from a heart attack? Dr. Wells pulled up Milton's file on her computer, her brow furrowing slightly as she read. Sometimes these things happen without warning. Stress can be a major factor. Was your son under any particular pressure lately? I thought about that. Milton had always been driven, but lately he had seemed different, more secretive. He would cut phone calls short when I entered the room, claim he was too busy to have our usual Sunday dinners. I had attributed it to the normal pressures of running a business, but now I wondered if there had been something more. Can you tell me who brought him in? I asked. His business partner, Derek Morrison. He said he found Mr. Holloway collapsed in his office around 6:30 in the evening. And you didn't find that odd? That Derek happened to be there so late? Dr. Wells looked uncomfortable. Mr. Holloway, I understand you're looking for answers, but sometimes there simply aren't satisfying explanations for tragedy. I leaned forward. Doctor, humor me. In your medical opinion, is there anything about my son's case that struck you as unusual? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the desk. Finally, she sighed. The only thing that seemed odd was how quickly rigor mortis set in. Usually it takes several hours, but your son's body showed signs of rigidity much sooner than normal. What would cause that? Extreme physical exertion before death. Certain medications, environmental factors, she paused. Or if the time of death was incorrect, my blood ran cold. Incorrect how? If someone had died earlier than reported and the body was kept in cold storage, it might explain the accelerated rigor mortis. She shook her head quickly. But that's highly unlikely in this situation. I thanked Dr. Wells and left the hospital with more questions than answers. If Milton had died earlier than reported, that would mean Derek had lied about finding him at 6:30. But why would he do that? And how would he have kept Milton's body cold? My next stop was Milton's office building, a gleaming 20-story structure in the heart of the business district. The elevator carried me to the 15th floor, where Holloway Morrison Enterprises occupied the entire level. The receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer, whom I had met at several company Christmas parties, looked surprised to see me. Mr. Holloway, I didn't expect... we're all so sorry about Milton. Thank you, Jennifer. I was wondering if I could take a look at Milton's office. There might be some personal items. She glanced nervously toward the corner office. I'm sorry, but Mr. Morrison said the office was off limits until the lawyers sort everything out. Derek said that? I tried to keep my voice level. He said it was for legal reasons, something about preserving the business records. She lowered her voice. Between you and me, he's been acting strange since it happened. He's been here every night, going through files, making phone calls. Every night? Yes, sir. He was here until almost midnight yesterday, even though it was the day of the funeral. I only know because I forgot my purse and came back for it. This was getting stranger by the minute. Why would Derek be working so late on the day of Milton's funeral? What was so urgent that it couldn't wait? Jennifer, can you tell me about the day Milton died? What time did Derek leave that evening? She thought for a moment. That's the thing. Derek was here when I left at 5, but he said he was heading out too. He seemed in a hurry to get somewhere. So Derek had lied about the timeline. If he left at 5 but claimed to find Milton's body at 6:30, where had he been for that hour and a half? I was about to ask more questions when the elevator doors opened and Derek himself walked out. He was impeccably dressed as always, but there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well either. Joel. He seemed genuinely surprised to see me. What brings you here? I wanted to collect some of Milton's personal things, I said, watching his face carefully. Of course. Although the lawyers advised me to keep the office sealed for now, legal liability, you understand. But once the estate is settled... He trailed off, his eyes darting away from mine. Derek, can I ask you something? Jennifer mentioned you've been working late every night since Milton died. That seems like odd timing. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Someone has to keep the business running. Milton would have wanted that. And you were here the night he died, working late? I've already given my statement to the police and the doctors. Milton collapsed around 6:30. I found him and called 911 immediately. His voice had taken on a defensive edge. But Jennifer said you left at 5. Derek's face flushed. Jennifer must be confused. It's been a traumatic time for everyone. Before I could press further, he excused himself and disappeared into Milton's office, closing the door firmly behind him. I caught a glimpse of stacks of papers on the desk and what looked like an open safe in the corner. As I rode the elevator down, Jennifer's words echoed in my head. Derek had been there every night, going through files that supposedly belonged to a dead man who could no longer protect his own interests. My last stop of the day was the Morrison Funeral Home, where I requested to speak with the director about the preparation of Milton's body. Harold Morrison, a thin man with pale hands and a perpetually sympathetic expression, led me to his office. "Mr. Holloway, I hope everything met with your approval yesterday. Your son looked very peaceful." "He did," I agreed. I was wondering about his personal effects, specifically his wedding ring. Morrison consulted his paperwork. "There's no mention of a wedding ring in our intake notes. Sometimes jewelry is removed at the hospital for medical procedures. But wouldn't it have been returned?" "Typically, yes, unless—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Unless what?" "Unless the family requested its removal for safekeeping. Sometimes valuable pieces are given to the spouse before the service, so Mallory could have taken Milton's ring. But why? And why hadn't she mentioned it?" Morrison cleared his throat. "There was one other thing that seemed unusual. The body was brought to us much colder than normal. Usually, by the time we receive someone from the hospital, body temperature has begun to normalize. But your son was still quite cold, as if he had been refrigerated. That matched what Dr. Wells had said about the accelerated rigor mortis. Everything pointed to Milton having died earlier than reported, or having been kept somewhere cold after death." As I drove home, my mind was spinning with theories. None of them good. Derek had lied about the timeline. Milton's body showed signs of having been kept cold. His wedding ring was missing. And Derek had been working late every night since the death, going through files in Milton's office. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was a picture I didn't want to see clearly, because if I was right, then Milton's death wasn't the sudden tragedy everyone believed it to be. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was Mallory, and her voice was strained. "Joel, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight? There's something important about Milton that I need to tell you." My heart rate spiked. "What kind of something?" "I can't say over the phone, but it's about why he's been acting strange lately. Please. Joel, I think you need to know the truth." After I hung up, I sat in my car for several minutes staring at my house. The truth. Finally, someone was ready to tell me the truth about what had happened to my son. But as I walked toward my front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth might be worse than anything I'd imagined. Because if Milton really had been acting strange lately, if there really were secrets he had been keeping, then maybe his death wasn't the random tragedy it appeared to be. Maybe someone had wanted my son dead, and maybe that someone was now preparing to inherit everything he had worked for. The key turned in my lock with a soft click, and I stepped into my empty house wondering if I was strong enough to handle whatever Mallory was about to tell me. Outside, darkness was falling, and somewhere in the city, Derek Morrison was probably going through more of my dead son's files, looking for whatever he needed to secure his claim to $12 million. But there was something Derek didn't know yet, something I was just beginning to understand. Dead men don't laugh. And if Milton had laughed in that casket, then maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as dead as everyone believed. Mallory's house sat on Elm Street like a monument to success. Milton had bought it for her 3 years ago, a sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured gardens and windows that gleamed even in the dim evening light. I had always felt uncomfortable there, surrounded by expensive furniture and artwork that seemed chosen more for their price tags than any emotional connection. Tonight, that discomfort felt magnified tenfold. Mallory answered the door wearing a black silk robe, her hair pulled back in a way that managed to look both casual and elegant. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but I couldn't tell if it was from genuine grief or carefully applied makeup. "Joel, thank you for coming." She stepped aside to let me in. "I know this has been difficult for both of us." The living room was dimly lit, candles flickering on the mantelpiece beneath a large portrait of Milton and Mallory on their wedding day. He looked so young in that photo, so hopeful. The man smiling down at us had no idea what his life would become. "You said you had something important to tell me about Milton," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. Mallory poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. "Would you like something to drink?" "I'd like answers." She nodded and settled into the armchair across from me, her fingers wrapped around the wine glass like it was an anchor. Milton had been acting strange for the past few months. Secretive. He would disappear for hours without explanation, make phone calls he wouldn't let me overhear. Secretive how? He started sleeping in the guest room, said he didn't want to disturb me with his insomnia. He would leave early in the morning and come home late, claiming he was working on some special project. She took a sip of wine. I thought he was having an affair. The words hit me like a slap. Milton would never. That's what I thought too, but then I found receipts for a storage unit across town. When he had rented under a false name, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I followed him there one day. My heart was pounding now. What did you find? Mallory set down her wine glass and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. She pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me with trembling fingers. These. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Milton talking to men I didn't recognize. Milton entering what looked like a small apartment building. Milton sitting in his car outside our family lawyer's office. And most disturbing of all, Milton meeting with Dr. Harrison, his longtime friend who happened to work at St. Mary's Hospital. I don't understand, I said, though a terrible suspicion was beginning to form in my mind. There's more. Mallory's voice was barely audible now. I hired a private investigator to follow him. What I discovered, she stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. What did you discover? Milton knew, Joel. He knew about Derek and me. The admission hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. You and Derek? Tears began to stream down her face, but they looked genuine this time. It started 6 months ago. I was lonely, Milton was always working, and Derek was there. He made me feel special, important. She wiped at her eyes. I never meant for it to happen. And Milton found out? The private investigator I hired to follow Milton? Milton had hired him first to follow me. She let out a bitter laugh. We were both spying on each other, both discovering terrible secrets. My mind was reeling. If Milton had known about the affair, then Derek's whispered threat at the funeral took on an entirely different meaning. But it still didn't explain the most important question. Mallory, how did Milton die? Really? She looked up at me with eyes full of something that might have been fear. That's just it, Joel. I don't think he did. The room seemed to tilt around me. What? The night he supposedly died, I was with Derek at his apartment. We have alibis for each other. But Joel, Milton had been planning something. The storage unit was full of documents, cash, fake identification papers. It looked like he was preparing to disappear. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to steady myself. Are you saying Milton faked his own death? I'm saying it's possible. Dr. Harrison was his college roommate. They've been friends for 20 years. If anyone could help him stage his death, it would be someone with access to death certificates and morgue facilities. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Milton's strange behavior, his meetings with Dr. Harrison, the inconsistencies in the timeline of his death, the body that was too cold, the accelerated rigor mortis, even that impossible laugh at the funeral. But why would he do this? I asked, though part of me was beginning to understand. Mallory stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark street. Think about it, Joel. If Milton died, who would inherit everything? Me, his loving widow. And who have I been spending my time with? Derek, his business partner who knows every detail of the company's finances. He wanted to catch you, I said, the full scope of the plan becoming clear. He wanted to see what you and Derek would do if you thought he was dead. And we walked right into his trap. Mallory's voice was hollow. We've been planning how to liquidate assets, transfer funds, restructure the business. Derek even talked about selling the company and moving to the Cayman Islands. I felt sick. My son had orchestrated his own funeral to expose the people who were supposed to love him. The betrayal must have been devastating, but Milton had chosen a brilliant and terrible form of revenge. Where is he? I asked. Mallory shook her head. I don't know, but Joel, there's something else. Something worse. I wasn't sure I could handle anything worse, but I nodded for her to continue. Derek didn't just want to steal Milton's money. He was planning to make sure Milton could never come back. She turned to face me, her face pale. He's been researching ways to have Milton declared legally dead as quickly as possible. And he's been asking questions about you too. About me, your health, your finances, whether you have a will. Derek sees you as the only obstacle to complete control of Milton's estate. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I think he was planning to arrange an accident for you too. The full horror of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Derek hadn't just been betraying Milton with his wife. He had been planning to murder both of us for money, and Milton, somehow knowing this, had decided to fake his death to expose the conspiracy before it could destroy what was left of our family. We have to find him, I said, standing up. We have to warn him that Derek is planning something. There's one more thing, Mallory said, reaching into the desk drawer again. She pulled out a small key. I found this hidden in Milton's office at home. I think it might be to the storage unit. I took the key, my hands shaking. The address? She wrote it down on a piece of paper. Joel, what if we're wrong? What if Milton really is dead and we're just grasping at conspiracy theories because we can't accept the truth? I thought about that laugh I had heard at the funeral, soft, knowing, unmistakably my son's. Then we'll know for sure. But if he's alive and in danger, we're the only ones who can help him. As I drove across town toward the storage facility, my mind was spinning with questions and fears. If Milton was alive, why hadn't he contacted me? How long had he been planning this elaborate deception? And most importantly, what was his endgame? The storage facility sat on the outskirts of town, a collection of metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and the place was deserted except for a single security guard who barely looked up from his magazine as I drove through the gate. Unit number 73 was in the back row, hidden from the main road. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key into the lock. It turned easily, and the metal door rolled up with a rusty squeal. What I found inside confirmed my worst fears and greatest hopes. The unit was set up like a command center. Corkboards covered with photographs and documents lined the walls. A small desk held stacks of legal papers, financial records, and what looked like surveillance equipment. But most telling of all was the small refrigerator in the corner, humming quietly in the darkness. I opened it and found vials of some kind of medication, along with detailed instructions in Milton's handwriting. The label read, "Temporary paralysis agent, mimics cardiac arrest symptoms." My son had drugged himself to fake his own death. I was still staring at the vials when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around expecting to see Milton emerging from the shadows. Instead, Derek stood in the doorway, his expensive suit rumpled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and in his hand was a gun pointed directly at my chest. "Hello, Joel," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "I was wondering when you would find this place. Milton always said you were too smart for your own good." My mouth went dry. "Derek, what are you doing here?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The same thing you are, I imagine, looking for answers about our dear departed Milton." He stepped into the storage unit, forcing me backward. "The difference is I already found what I was looking for, and what was that? Proof that your son is a very clever, very dangerous man who needs to be stopped before he ruins everything." Derek's finger moved to the trigger. "The question is, Joel, are you going to help me find him, or are you going to be another problem I need to solve?" I looked into Derek's eyes and saw something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a man who had been backed into a corner and was willing to kill to protect his secrets. And somewhere out there, my son was alive but in terrible danger, unaware that his carefully laid plans had been discovered by the very man who wanted him dead. The gun in Derek's hand looked enormous in the dim light of the storage unit. I had never stared down the barrel of a weapon before, and the experience was surreal, like watching a movie where I was both the audience and the victim. "You don't want to do this," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Derek laughed, but it was nothing like Milton's warm chuckle. This was sharp, bitter, the sound of a man who had already crossed too many lines to worry about one more. "You're right, I don't want to, but your son has forced my hand. Milton is dead," I said, testing him. "Please, Joel, don't insult my intelligence." Derek gestured at the medical equipment surrounding us. "Your boy staged quite an elaborate performance. Temporary paralysis drugs, a friend in the hospital willing to falsify records, even a complicit funeral director. It's impressive, really." My heart sank. If Derek knew all this, then Milton was in more danger than I had imagined. "How long have you known?" I started suspecting something when the will reading was postponed. Milton's lawyer claimed there were irregularities in the documentation, but I knew better. Derek's smile was predatory. So I did what any good business partner would do. I investigated, and found this place. Among other things, your son has been very busy these past few months. Did you know he moved $12 million out of his accounts 3 weeks before his supposed death? Very convenient timing. The number hit me like a physical blow. Milton's entire fortune gone. Where did he move it? That's what we're going to find out. Derek reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand and pulled out a cell phone. "You're going to call him. I don't know how to reach him." "Oh, but you do." Derek's voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a slow child. "Milton left you a way to contact him. He's too sentimental not to include Daddy in his grand plan." I thought about that and realized Derek was probably right. If Milton had faked his death, he wouldn't have left me completely in the dark. There had to be some way for us to communicate, some signal I was supposed to recognize. Then it hit me. The grandfather clock in my hallway had been chiming at odd times lately. I had assumed it needed repair, but what if Milton had tampered with it? What if those irregular chimes were actually a code? Derek must have seen something in my expression because his grip on the gun tightened. "There we go. You figured it out, haven't you? Before I could answer, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. Well, speak of the devil. He held up the phone so I could see the screen. A text message from an unknown number. Storage unit compromised. Move to backup location. Package is secure. Milton? I asked. Derek nodded. Your son has been watching us. The question is, for how long? He looked around the storage unit suspiciously, as if cameras might be hidden in the shadows. That's when I noticed it, a small red light blinking in the corner near the ceiling. Milton had been recording everything. He knew we were here, knew that Derek had found his hideout, and most importantly, knew that Derek was armed and dangerous. He's coming, I said, more to myself than to Derek. Yes, he is. And when he gets here, you're going to convince him to transfer that $12 million back to where it belongs. In exchange, I won't put a bullet in your head. The cold calculation in Derek's voice made my stomach turn. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a man who had been planning murder for money, who saw human lives as obstacles to be removed. What about Mallory? I asked. She knows the truth now. Derek's laugh was ugly. Mallory will do whatever I tell her to do. She's too compromised to run to the police and too scared to cross me. He paused. Besides, she doesn't know about the gun. A new horror crept into my mind. You're going to kill her too. Eventually. Can't have loose ends. Derek glanced at his watch. But first things first. Your son should be arriving any minute now. As if summoned by his words, we heard the sound of a car engine outside. Derek motioned for me to move toward the back of the storage unit, keeping the gun trained on my chest. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Then a voice I had thought I would never hear again called out into the darkness. Dad, are you in there? Milton, alive, real, and walking into a trap. Tell him to come in, Derek whispered. Don't try to warn him, or you'll be dead before he takes another step. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could I lure my son into danger? How could I be the bait in his own destruction? Dad? Milton's voice was closer now, just outside the storage unit. I'm here, I finally called out, my voice cracking. I'm here, son. Milton appeared in the doorway, and for a moment I forgot about the gun, forgot about Derek, forgot about everything except the overwhelming relief of seeing my child alive. He looked thinner than before. His hair was longer, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But it was unmistakably him. Jesus, Dad, when I saw Derek's car, I thought... Milton stopped mid-sentence as he noticed Derek standing in the shadows. Oh. Hello, Milton. Derek stepped forward, keeping the gun pointed at me but clearly visible to my son. Quite a performance you put on. I was almost convinced. Milton's eyes darted between Derek and me, calculating rapidly. Let him go, Derek. This is between you and me. Actually, it's between me and $12 million that rightfully belongs to the company. Your little disappearing act doesn't change the terms of our partnership agreement. Partnership. Milton laughed, and for the first time I heard real bitterness in his voice. You mean your plan to steal everything I built while sleeping with my wife? Derek's face flushed. Mallory came to me. Milton. She was lonely, neglected. You were so busy playing business mogul that you forgot you had a wife. I knew about the affair for months, Milton said quietly. I also knew you were planning to have me killed. The admission hung in the air like a bomb. Derek's hand wavered slightly, surprise flickering across his features. That's impossible. Milton reached into his jacket pocket slowly, keeping his movements visible. He pulled out a small recording device. August 15th, 2024. You and Mallory in your apartment discussing how to arrange an accident for me. Something that would look natural but happen soon enough that you could liquidate the business assets before anyone started asking questions. Derek's face had gone white. You were supposed to be dead. Funny thing about death, it gives you a lot of time to think and plan. Milton's voice was calm, almost conversational. Did you really think I would just roll over and let you destroy everything? Let you hurt my father? Your father was next on the list, Derek said. His desperation making him cruel. Old man has a heart condition, doesn't he? Grief over losing his son, too much stress. These things happen. Rage surged through me, hot and pure. This monster had been planning to kill both of us, to wipe out our entire family for money that he had never earned. The police are already on their way, Milton continued. I've been recording everything since you walked into this storage unit. Attempted murder, conspiracy, theft. You're looking at life in prison, Derek. Derek's eyes darted around wildly, like a trapped animal. You're bluffing. Am I? Milton pulled out his phone and showed Derek the screen. A call to 911 was in progress, had been for the past 10 minutes. They've been listening to everything. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Derek heard them too, and something in his expression snapped. The careful calculation was replaced by pure panic. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you both with me," he snarled, swinging the gun toward Milton. I don't remember making the decision to move. One moment I was standing frozen in terror. The next I was throwing myself forward, knocking Derek off balance just as the gun fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and I felt something hot graze my shoulder as we both went down. Milton was on Derek in an instant, wrestling for control of the weapon. They rolled across the concrete floor, grunting and swearing, the gun skittering away into the darkness. I scrambled after it, my shoulder screaming with pain, but managed to kick it out of reach just as the storage facility was flooded with red and blue lights. Police officers swarmed into the unit, shouting orders, separating us, securing the scene. Derek was handcuffed and dragged away, still screaming threats and accusations. The recording device and surveillance equipment were bagged as evidence. Paramedics checked my shoulder, just a graze, they said, though it hurt like hell. Through it all, Milton stood beside me, his hand on my uninjured shoulder, real and solid and alive. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked when the chaos had died down enough for us to talk. Milton looked exhausted, older than his 37 years. "Because I knew you wouldn't let me do it. You would have tried to talk me out of it, tried to find some other way. There had to be another way. Was there?" Milton's voice was quiet, but firm. "Derek was planning to kill us both, Dad. The only way to stop him was to make him reveal his true nature, and the only way to do that was to make him think he had won." I thought about that as we gave our statements to the police, as Derek was taken away in the back of a patrol car, as the storage unit was sealed off as a crime scene. Milton had risked everything, his identity, his fortune, his relationships, to expose a conspiracy that would have destroyed our family. "What happens now?" I asked as we finally walked out of the storage facility together. Milton was quiet for a long moment. "Now I have to figure out how to come back from the dead. Legally speaking, it's going to be complicated." "And Mallory?" His jaw tightened. "Mallory made her choice. She'll have to live with the consequences." We stood by his car, a beat-up sedan that was nothing like the luxury vehicles he used to drive. He looked different in the harsh fluorescent light of the parking lot. Harder, more cautious, like a man who had learned not to trust the people closest to him. "I'm proud of you," I said finally. "What you did took incredible courage." Milton smiled for the first time since I had seen him in that doorway. It was a tired smile, tinged with sadness, but it was genuine. "I learned from the best, Dad. You taught me that family is worth fighting for, no matter the cost." As we drove away from the storage facility, I realized that Derek had been wrong about one thing. This hadn't been about money, not really. It had been about trust and betrayal, and the lengths a son will go to protect the people he loves. Milton was alive. Our family was safe, and sometimes, that's all the victory you can ask for. The safe house Milton had been living in for the past 3 days was a modest apartment above a used bookstore on the outskirts of town. As we climbed the narrow stairs, my shoulder still aching from Derek's bullet graze, I couldn't help but marvel at how thoroughly my son had planned his resurrection. "Dr. Harrison helped me find this place," Milton explained, unlocking the door. "He's been the only person who knew the truth from the beginning." Inside, the apartment was spartanly furnished but functional. A single bed, a small kitchenette, and a desk covered with legal documents and financial papers. It looked like the hideout of a man who had been planning his return from the dead with methodical precision. "Coffee?" Milton asked, moving to the kitchen like this was a normal father-son visit. "Please." I settled into the one comfortable chair, wincing as the movement pulled at my bandaged shoulder. "Milton, we need to talk about what happens next." He paused in the act of measuring coffee grounds. "I know what you're going to say, Dad, that I should have trusted you from the beginning, that we could have found another way. Actually, I was going to say that I understand why you did it." I watched surprise flicker across his face. "Derek was planning to kill us both. You saved our lives." Milton turned back to the coffee maker, but I could see the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "I've been carrying this alone for so long I forgot what it felt like to have someone on my side. You're not alone anymore." I leaned forward, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. "But son, we have a problem. Derek may be in jail, but Mallory is still out there and she knows you're alive." Milton nodded grimly. "I've been thinking about that. She's going to be desperate now. With Derek arrested and the conspiracy exposed, she's facing fraud charges, conspiracy charges, possibly accessory to attempted murder. What do you think she'll do? Run?" Milton brought me a steaming cup of coffee and sat across from me. "But first she'll try to grab whatever money she can get her hands on. I transferred the $12 million to an offshore account, but she still has access to our joint accounts, the house, some investments. I sipped the coffee, thinking, how much are we talking about? Maybe $800,000. Total. Not enough to disappear forever, but enough to buy her some time. Milton's expression was grim. The problem is, she's not thinking rationally. People in her position make stupid, dangerous decisions. As if summoned by his words, Milton's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. What is it? He held up the phone so I could see. A text message from Mallory. I know you're alive. Meet me at the house in 1 hour or I burn it all down. Burn what down? I asked. Milton was already moving toward a filing cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a thick folder and spread photographs across the desk. Before I faked my death, I gathered evidence of everything Derek and Mallory had been doing. Financial records, audio recordings, photographs of their meetings. He pointed to one particular photo showing Derek handing Mallory a large envelope, including evidence of other crimes. My stomach dropped. What other crimes? Derek has been embezzling from the company for over 2 years. Small amounts at first, but it escalated. I estimate he stole close to $3 million. Milton's voice was tight with controlled anger. Mallory knew about it. She helped him hide the money in accounts under her maiden name. And she's threatening to destroy the evidence? More than that. She's threatening to destroy everything. Financial records, business documents, anything that could implicate her or Derek. Milton ran his hands through his hair. If she destroys that evidence, Derek might be able to get the charges reduced. He could claim he was acting alone, that the murder plot was just him going rogue. I understood the implications immediately. Without the evidence of the larger conspiracy, Derek might serve only a few years for attempted assault. He could be free while Milton and I were still looking over our shoulders. We can't let that happen, I said. Milton looked at me with something that might have been pride. I was hoping you'd say that. But Dad, this is dangerous. If we confront her, she might do something desperate. She's already doing something desperate. I stood up, testing my shoulder. The pain was manageable. What's your plan? Milton spread out a hand-drawn map of the house on Elm Street. She's expecting me to come alone, probably hoping to manipulate me one last time. But what if I don't show up alone? You want me to come with you? I want you to be my backup. There's a side entrance to the house through the garden. While I'm talking to her in the living room, you can secure the evidence from my home office. Milton pointed to a room on the second floor of the house. Everything important is in a fireproof safe behind the bookshelf. I studied the map, thinking through the logistics. What if she's armed? She's not the type. Mallory's weapon has always been manipulation, not violence. But if things go wrong... Milton pulled out his phone and showed me an app. I'll have a direct line to Detective Rodriguez. One button press and the police will be on their way. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was better than letting Mallory destroy evidence that could put Derek away for decades. And honestly, part of me wanted to confront her. This woman had betrayed my son, conspired to kill us both, and was now trying to escape justice by burning everything down. All right, I said, but we do this smart, no unnecessary risks. Milton smiled, and for the first time since his supposed death, it looked genuinely happy. Thanks, Dad, for everything. An hour later, we were parked down the street from the house on Elm Street. From the outside, it looked exactly the same as it had during happier times. The perfectly manicured lawn, the gleaming windows, the expensive cars in the driveway. But now I knew it was all built on lies and stolen money. Remember, Milton said, checking his watch. Give me 15 minutes to get her talking. She'll want to negotiate, try to work out some kind of deal. That should give you enough time to get to the office and back. I squeezed his arm. Be careful, son. Don't underestimate her just because she's desperate. You too, Dad. I watched Milton walk up the front steps and ring the doorbell. Even from a distance, I could see Mallory's silhouette in the window, could sense the tension in the air. Then the door opened and Milton disappeared inside. I counted to 60, then made my way around to the garden entrance. Milton had given me his spare key months ago, back when I used to help him with yard work on weekends. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. The side door opened quietly and I slipped into the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet except for the murmur of voices from the living room. I couldn't make out words, but I could hear the cadence of an argument building. Moving as quietly as possible, I climbed the back stairs to the second floor. Milton's home office was exactly as he had described it, a masculine space with dark wood furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. Behind the largest shelf, hidden from casual view, was a small safe built into the wall. Milton had given me the combination, Sarah's birthday, the date my wife had passed away. Even in the midst of planning his fake death, my son had been thinking about family, about the people who truly mattered. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of documents, USB drives, and what looked like audio recording equipment. I grabbed everything, stuffing it into a messenger bag I had brought for this purpose. That's when I heard Mallory's voice, raised and angry, drifting up from the first floor. You think you're so clever, don't you? Staging your own death, making me look like a fool? Milton's response was too quiet to hear, but it must have enraged her because her next words were shouted. Well, guess what, husband? I have a few surprises of my own. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor made my blood run cold. I abandoned stealth and rushed toward the stairs, the bag of evidence clutched against my chest. In the living room, I found Milton backed against the fireplace, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Mallory stood 10 feet away, and in her hands was not a gun, but something almost worse, a can of gasoline and a cigarette lighter. Hello, Joel, she said without turning around. I was wondering when you would show up. Milton always was a daddy's boy. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming. She had doused the entire living room, the expensive furniture, the Persian rugs, the family photographs that lined the mantelpiece. One spark and the whole place would go up in flames. Mallory, I said carefully, put down the lighter. We can work this out. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Work it out? Your son ruined my life. My husband is in jail because of his sick little game. Derek is in jail because he tried to kill us, Milton said, his voice steady despite the danger. Derek loved me. Mallory's composure cracked, revealing the hysteria underneath. He was going to take care of me, give me the life I deserved, and you destroyed it all with your paranoid fantasies. I saw Milton's hand inch toward his phone, but Mallory noticed too. Don't even think about it. I see that phone come out and I burn this place down with all of us inside. She flicked the lighter, and a small flame danced in her fingers. You want your precious evidence, your financial records and audio recordings? Watch them burn. That's when I realized she knew about the safe. Somehow she had discovered Milton's hiding place and was planning to destroy everything rather than let it be used against Derek. The bag, she said, noticing what I was carrying. Give it to me, now. I looked at Milton, saw the calculation in his eyes. We were trapped. If I gave her the evidence, Derek might escape justice. If I didn't, she might kill us all in a fire that would destroy the evidence anyway. But Milton had one advantage that Mallory didn't know about. His phone wasn't in his pocket, it was in his shoe, already connected to Detective Rodriguez, broadcasting everything live. He caught my eye and mouthed a single word: trust. Then he did something that took incredible courage. He stepped forward, moving closer to the gasoline-soaked furniture and the unstable woman holding a flame. You're right, Mallory. I did ruin your life, but not because I was paranoid, because I loved you, and I couldn't accept what you had become. His words seemed to surprise her. The lighter wavered in her hand. I kept hoping you would come back to me. Milton continued, his voice gentle now. Even after I found out about Derek, I thought maybe we could work through it, save our marriage, start over. Tears began to stream down Mallory's face, but she didn't lower the lighter. You never loved me. You loved your business more, your money more, your father more. No, Milton said softly. I loved you most of all. That's why this hurts so much. For a moment, I thought he might actually reach her, might convince her to put down the lighter and face justice with some dignity intact. Then we heard sirens in the distance getting closer. Mallory's face twisted with rage and betrayal. You called them. I called them because I want you to live, Milton said. Because even after everything, I don't want you to die. She raised the lighter toward the gasoline-soaked curtains, and I knew we were out of time. Mallory, don't, I shouted, lunging forward with the bag of evidence. But it was too late. The flame touched the fabric and the room exploded into fire. The fire moved faster than I could have imagined. What started as a small flame on the curtains became a wall of heat and smoke in seconds. The gasoline-soaked furniture ignited like it had been waiting for this moment, filling the room with orange light and the acrid smell of burning fabric. Milton grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the kitchen. This way, Dad. Behind us, I could hear Mallory screaming, not in pain, but in rage and frustration. She had realized that her final act of destruction would accomplish nothing except putting all of us in danger. We stumbled through the smoke-filled hallway as sirens wailed outside. Milton led me through the back door just as the first fire trucks arrived, their red lights painting the neighborhood in harsh, urgent colors. The evidence, I gasped, clutching the messenger bag against my chest. Safe, Milton assured me, helping me to a spot on the lawn where we could breathe clean air. Everything we need is right there. Police officers were already surrounding the house, some helping firefighters connect hoses while others secured the perimeter. Detective Rodriguez appeared beside us, her expression grim but relieved. Are you both all right? She asked, checking us for injuries. We're fine, Milton said, but Mallory is still inside. As if summoned by his words, we heard shouting from the front of the house. Through the smoke and chaos, I could see firefighters carrying someone out, Mallory, unconscious but breathing, overcome by smoke inhalation. "She'll be fine," Detective Rodriguez said, following my gaze. "And she'll be in custody as soon as she's medically cleared." I watched as paramedics loaded Mallory into an ambulance. Even unconscious, even defeated, she looked beautiful. It was easy to understand how Milton had fallen in love with her, how Derek had been willing to risk everything for her attention, but beauty without character was just an empty shell, and Mallory had proven that she was hollow at her core. "What happens now?" I asked. Detective Rodriguez gestured toward the messenger bag I was still holding. "Now we use this evidence to make sure Derek Morrison spends the rest of his life in prison. Attempted murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, he's looking at 30 years minimum. And Mallory? Arson, conspiracy, accessory to embezzlement. She'll probably get 15 to 20. The detective's expression was professionally neutral, but I could see satisfaction in her eyes. Justice isn't always perfect, but sometimes it's thorough. Milton was staring at the burning house, watching flames consume what had once been his home. "I built that place for her," he said quietly. "Picked out every piece of furniture, every painting, every fixture. I thought if I gave her a perfect life, she would be happy." "You can't buy happiness, son, and you certainly can't buy love." He nodded, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. Despite everything Mallory had done, despite her betrayal and her willingness to see us both dead, Milton had genuinely loved her. That kind of love doesn't disappear overnight, even when it's proven to be one-sided. "Mr. Holloway?" A young police officer approached us with a clipboard. "We need to get your statements about what happened inside the house." For the next 2 hours, we sat in the back of a police car and recounted everything. Milton's elaborate plan to fake his death, Derek's conspiracy to steal the business, Mallory's final desperate attempt to destroy evidence. It sounded like something from a crime novel, too complex and dramatic to be real. But the evidence didn't lie. The audio recordings from Milton's phone had captured everything. Derek's confession, his threats, Mallory's admission of arson. Combined with the financial records and photographs from the safe, it painted a complete picture of a conspiracy that had been months in the making. By dawn, the fire was out, and the house was a charred skeleton. Most of the structure had survived, but the interior was gutted. Everything Milton had built with Mallory, all those years of marriage and shared dreams, had literally gone up in smoke. "I'm sorry," I said, as we stood looking at the ruins. Milton shook his head. "Don't be. This needed to happen. Not the fire, but the end of it all. I was holding on to something that was never real to begin with." Detective Rodriguez approached us one final time before we left. "Derek Morrison has agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He wants to avoid the death penalty." I felt a grim satisfaction. Derek would spend the rest of his life in a cell, thinking about how his greed had cost him everything. It wouldn't bring back the trust he had violated or the innocence he had destroyed, but it was justice nonetheless. "What about the business?" I asked Milton as we drove away from Elm Street. "Holloway Morrison Enterprises dies with this scandal," Milton said. "But I've been thinking about starting over. Something smaller, more personal, maybe something we could run together." The idea surprised me. I was 62 years old, supposedly ready for retirement, not new ventures. But the thought of working alongside my son, of building something honest and clean from the ground up, was appealing. "What did you have in mind?" Milton smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. "Security consulting. Help people protect themselves from the kind of betrayal we just went through. We've certainly learned enough about the subject. Over the next few weeks, as the legal proceedings moved forward and the media attention died down, Milton and I began planning our new life. He moved into the spare bedroom of my house while he sorted out his legal resurrection. Apparently, coming back from the dead requires an enormous amount of paperwork. The $12 million he had hidden offshore became the seed money for our new company. Holloway Security Consulting specialized in background checks, fraud prevention, and threat assessment. Our first clients were small business owners who had heard about our story and wanted protection from their own potential Derek Morrisons. We hired Dr. Harrison as our medical consultant. His expertise in recognizing the signs of poisoning and drug-induced illness proved valuable in several cases. Jennifer, Milton's former receptionist, came to work for us as office manager. She said she had always suspected something was wrong with Derek's timeline the day Milton died, and she was excited to be part of something that helped people instead of exploiting them. 3 months after the fire, I was in our new office reviewing a case file when Milton knocked on my door. "Dad, you have a visitor." I looked up to see a woman standing behind him, tall, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. She looked like someone who had seen trouble but hadn't let it break her. "This is Sarah Chen," Milton said. "She's a forensic accountant who worked on the Derek Morrison case. She's also—" He paused, and I was surprised to see him blush slightly. "She's someone I've been spending time with." I stood to shake her hand, studying her face. She met my gaze directly, no deception or manipulation in her expression. After Mallory, I had wondered if Milton would ever trust another woman. But Sarah Chen looked like someone worth trusting. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Holloway. Milton talks about you constantly. Please, call me Joel, and thank you for your work on the case. I know it couldn't have been easy sorting through Derek's web of lies. Actually, it was satisfying," she said with a slight smile. "I specialize in financial fraud cases, and Derek Morrison was one of the most thorough criminals I've ever investigated. It felt good to see justice served. We talked for a few minutes about the case, about our new business, about Milton's adjustment to being alive again. Sarah was clearly intelligent and principled, and the way she looked at Milton suggested genuine affection rather than gold-digging opportunism. After she left, Milton lingered in my office. "She seems wonderful," I said. "She is. Dad, I know it's soon after everything that happened, but Sarah makes me feel like I can trust again, like I can build something real with someone." I thought about that. 6 months ago, Milton had been married to a woman who was planning to kill him. Now he was slowly learning to open his heart to someone new. It took courage to love again after betrayal, especially betrayal that deep. "Trust your instincts, son. You've earned the right to be happy." That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. My shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar as a reminder of that night in the storage unit. The physical healing had been easier than the emotional healing, but both had progressed in their own time. My phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Rodriguez. "Derek Morrison died in prison today. Heart attack. Thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long time. Derek had been 41 years old, healthy except for his greed and cruelty. A heart attack seemed almost poetic. The man who had been planning to fake Milton's cardiac arrest had died of the real thing. I didn't feel satisfaction at the news. Just a quiet sense of closure. Derek Morrison would never hurt anyone again. The debt had been paid, the scales balanced. Milton found me on the porch an hour later, holding his own glass of wine. "Detective Rodriguez called me too," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "How do you feel about it?" I considered the question, relieved, I think, and grateful. Grateful? That we survived, that we found each other again, that we learned who our real family is. I raised my glass toward the darkening sky. "To second chances, son." Milton clinked his glass against mine. "To second chances, Dad, and to the people who deserve them." We sat in comfortable silence as night fell around us. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of traffic, of life continuing its normal rhythms. But here on my porch with my son alive and safe beside me, the world felt peaceful for the first time in months. The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 9 times, its rhythm steady and true. Milton had fixed the mechanism when he moved back in, returning it to its proper function. No more codes, no more secrets, just time moving forward as it should. I thought about Mallory sometimes, serving her sentence in a women's prison 3 hours north of here. The newspapers said she had become a model prisoner, working in the library, taking correspondence courses. Maybe she was finally learning who she was when she wasn't performing for someone else's benefit. I hoped so. Not because I forgave her. Forgiveness was Milton's choice to make, not mine. But because hatred was a poison that hurt the person carrying it more than its target, I had learned to let go of my anger, not for her sake, but for my own peace of mind. As for Derek, he had made his choices and paid the price. His story was over, but ours was just beginning. "Dad?" Milton's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Yes, son?" "Thank you. For believing in me, for trusting my plan, for risking your life to help me. I know it wasn't easy." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, feeling the solid reality of him under my palm. "That's what family does, Milton. We protect each other, no matter the cost." He smiled, and in the porch light he looked young again, not the haunted man who had faked his own death, but the boy who used to help me with yard work on Sunday afternoons, who brought me coffee when I worked late, who called me every week just to check in. That boy had grown into a man who was capable of incredible courage and careful planning, a man who could love deeply and forgive grudgingly, A man who understood that sometimes the only way to save your family is to risk everything to protect it. The stars were coming out now, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. But darkness wasn't scary when you weren't facing it alone. And for the first time since that terrible day at the funeral home, I felt truly hopeful about the future. Milton was alive. Our family was safe. And sometimes, that's all the victory you can ask for.